Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope lovers of history. It's nice to see so many familiar faces in the audience. Yeah, but here's my good idea. Is that better? Okay. So it's nice to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I'd like to start off with a joke, but I don't have any. So we're going to start regardless. Our first Christmas in Wilmington, we took the candlelight tour of historic Wilmington. In a dimly lit small dining room, a little lady in a period gown made this remark: "In this room, Mary Lily Keenan first met Henry Flagler, one of the richest men in America." This one sentence sent me on a quest which continues to today. And so tonight, hopefully in only 45 minutes, I bring to you a history of Landfall, from Rockefeller to Keenan, and keeping up with the Joneses. This is a tale of wealth, ambition, society, suicide, and possibly murder. The story involves the richest man in the world, John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in all of Florida, Henry Flagler, the richest woman in America, Mary Lily Keenan Flagler Bingham, and of course, the richest man in Wilmington, Pembroke Jones. Let's go. John Davison Rockefeller was born in 1938 in Hartford, New York. I'm sorry. He was the oldest of 7 children, and at the age of 7, he was known to sell his candy to other kids for a profit. Since his father, Bill, was a flim-flam man and was gone from the house most of the time, John learned at an early age the value of hard work and fiscal responsibility. When he was 14, the family moved to Strongsville, Ohio, just south of Cleveland. John never finished high school. At age 15, he spent 40 of his hard-earned dollars on a commercial course. And by 16, he had his first job as a bookkeeper for a farm product firm in Cleveland. There was John, sitting on top of a high stool, bent over his work, much like, well, Bob Cratchit. 2 years later, Colonel Edwin Drake, a former railroad conductor for the New Haven Railroad, was summoned to Western Pennsylvania because of his ability to drill into the ground for salt. He drilled beside Oil Creek near Titusville, where for centuries Native Americans had skimmed off this sticky substance from the water and used it for medicine. On August 28, 1857, when oil bubbled up into his second well, the first oil boom in America began. Now, Rockefeller immediately recognized the potential for profit in the oil business. In 1860, kerosene was first distilled in Cleveland, and it would forever change how homes and businesses were lighted in eastern United States and Western Europe, replacing the whale oil lamp and the candle. By age 24, Rockefeller was in the oil business. 3 years later, he needed additional capital to expand his business. So he went to a fellow businessman by the name of Stephen Harkins. Harkins said, "I will give you $100,000 with one stipulation, that my half-brother, Henry Flagler, be taken into the firm as treasurer." Now, Flagler had already enjoyed both success and failure in the business world, most recently a bankrupt salt mine in northern Michigan. By this time, nearly 50 small refineries had sprung up on the floor of the Cuyahoga River Valley, and 3 separate railroads served the city of Cleveland. Well, John and Henry proved to be an efficient team. While Rockefeller was master of the deal, where have I heard that? And he could control both the supply of oil and the refining. Flagler concentrated on transportation, and before long he had negotiated sweetheart deals with each of the 3 railroads, whereby he promised the railroad a huge volume of cargo in return for a low fixed cartage fee. In 1870, the Standard Oil Company was formed, with a distribution of 10,000 shares of stock, 2,600 to Rockefeller, 1,300 to Flagler. Before long, both men owned fine mansions on Euclid Avenue. I don't know if anyone knows Cleveland. And in the mornings, they could be seen marching together a half mile to their shared office on the public square, talking business all the way. By 1876, Standard Oil was shipping products through the ports of Philadelphia and New York, and it became necessary for Flagler to move to New York City and open an office there. Now, Henry Flagler's wife had tuberculosis. Although she had borne him 3 children, she was chronically ill, and Henry spent most of his evening at home reading to her at the bedside. Their first winter in New York, Mary's doctors suggested that Henry might take her to Florida for her health. Florida at this time was rather primitive and had a population of 250,000, and the largest city was Key West. So Henry and Mary piled onto the train in New York, which at that time could only take them as far as Jacksonville. Beyond Jacksonville, rail travel was rather scratchy, so they then boarded a steamer on down to St. Augustine, America's oldest city. Henry's impression of this mosquito-infested town with no luxury accommodations was unfavorable, and soon they were back on the road to New York. The next summer, to get Mary out of the city, Henry rented a 35-acre estate with a 40-room mansion, which jutted out into Long Island Sound at Mamaroneck, New York, known as Satan's Toe. He also hired for Mary a nurse by the name of Ida Alice Shores. Now, Ida Alice was 18 years younger than Henry. She had red hair, green eyes. She came from a family of entertainers. Alice was an actress. Despite Alice's tender care, Mary Flagler pursued a progressively downhill course and died in May of 1881. Following his wife's death, Henry purchased Satan's Toe and would plow about $200,000 into improvements consisting of a ballroom and a massive sea wall. The next, you read this, I can use my hand. The next summer, Henry had a little liver trouble, and he was hospitalized for this, following which he decided to go to Florida once again for a little R&R. So he filed on the train in New York, and now the train could go all the way to St. Augustine. But accompanying him on this trip was Ida Alice, who had become his wife. Ida Alice was a party girl. She loved to entertain, and Henry would later name both his private rail car and his 160-foot yacht the Alicia, in honor of his new wife. In 1891, Henry Flagler first met Mary Lily Keenan. Whether that was, let me back up a minute, I'm sorry. In 1884, he first bought his first property in St. Augustine, and he built his first hotel, the Ponce de Leon. Now, the Ponce was of Spanish and Italian Renaissance design, It was built of coquina, which is a mixture, as you may know, of seashells and cement. It had 540 rooms, and the rooms would go for between $45 and $75 a night. Across the street from the Ponce, he built his second hotel, the Alcazar. The Alcazar was fashioned after that beautiful palace in Seville, Spain, which you may have visited. The Alcazar boasted a 120 by 50-foot pool, which was the largest pool in Florida. Winter visitors chose the Alcazar when they did not wish to pay the Ponce prices. He also built in St. Augustine a fine mansion for Ida Alice by the name of Kirkside. Now, we're up to 1891. In 1891, Henry first met Mary Lily Keenan. Whether that meeting took place in the small room in Wilmington, or more likely in Newport, where Henry now had a fine mansion, and Mary Lily was frequently the summer house guest of, can you guess? The Pembroke Joneses. Mary Lily Keenan was 38 years younger than Henry Flagler. Mm-hmm. She was born at Liberty Hall in Kenansville. Now I know everybody in this room has seen the sign for Liberty Hall as you whiz by Kenansville on I-40. But I would bet that no one in this room has ever turned off to look at it. Anyone ever seen Liberty Hall? No. Ah, 2, 3. Okay. Mary Lily grew up in Wilmington, and she went to the Tileston School, and later on to Peace Institute in Raleigh, which I believe still exists today as Peace College. She was 5'2", eyes of blue, with a very shapely figure. Mary Lily always was quite talented, and she could both sing and play the piano. Soon she was a desired party guest at the various social whirls of the time, and although she had no main man. Before long, she was attending this winter balls in Florida of Henry and Ida Alice, frequently accompanying Henry's niece by the name of Elizabeth Ashley. Isn't that a pretty name? Elizabeth Ashley. Now, I got sidetracked. Henry, in 1993, Ida Alice was given a Ouija board, which was so named from the French and German words for yes. And she would never be the same. The board told her that the Tsar of Russia was madly in love with her. Alice was temporarily admitted to a sanitarium in Westchester County in 1895, and 2 years later would be readmitted to the same facility for life. Her stay funded by Flagler with $1.4 million worth of Standard Oil stock. Mary Lily was now with Henry Flagler, much to the disdain of the Keenan family, since Henry was a married man. Henry desired to marry Mary Lily, but although his wife had been declared legally insane, there was only one ground for divorce in the state of New York, which was adultery, most unlikely with Alice in the institution. So Henry moved his legal residence from the state of Florida, from the state of New York, to the state of Florida. And then by means of $125,000 worth of bribes to the governor and to the state senators, a bill sailed through the Florida legislature, making insanity a ground for divorce in Florida, only 10 days after his divorce became final. Henry Flagler would marry Mary Lily Keenan at Liberty Hall. The estate was spruced up quite significantly for the occasion, probably with Flagler money. The day before his wedding, Flagler boarded his private rail car, New York, came down all the way to Wilmington, with a few of his New York friends. That evening, they would stay as the house guests of the Pembroke Joneses, of course. The next morning, he took the car back up to Magnolia, the closest rail depot. His party got off the train, boarded horse-drawn carriages for the remaining trip to Keenansville. Now, Henry had some wedding presents for his wife. He gave Mary Lily as wedding presents $1 million worth of Standard Oil stock, $2 million of bonds, and a string of pearls valued at $500,000, the largest of which was the size of a robin's egg.
Wow.
Following the ceremony, back to Magnolia, back on the train, back to New York. I left that one there. When Henry was approaching Keenansville, he had under his arm a large briefcase filled with Standard Oil stock, which he would distribute amongst the Keenan family. And now the Keenans would be very happy. I'm sorry, Keith. Now he's back in New York. He immediately began plans for the palatial mansion he would build for Mary Lily in Palm Beach, which was known as Whitehall. Whitehall was built by over 1,000 men in 18 months at a cost of about $3 million. It's really something, and I hope you've had a chance to visit Whitehall. Not too long ago, Flagler's granddaughter restored Whitehall as a tourist destination. Entering through massive bronze doors, the 110 by 40 foot great room was decorated with 7 shades of marble. On the floor was a single woven carpet the size of a small soccer field. Over 80 guests could be seated for a banquet in the great hall. Upstairs were 15 guest suites, and in Mary Lily's bathroom, the first sunken tub in America, which was carved from a single block of yellow Carrara marble. Entertaining was lavish at Whitehall. Henry next sought to extend his railroad and hotel empire in Florida. In Palm Beach, next to the inland Lake Worth, I don't know if you know Palm Beach, he built the Royal Ponciana Hotel. And over on the shore, he built the Breakers Hotel, and also a gambling casino. Now the Breakers burned, but it was later rebuilt, and it exists today as the only remaining Flagler Hotel in Florida. The Breakers is very nice. I hope that you have stayed at the Breakers. As he extended his rails further down the east coast of Florida, the state of Florida gave him 8,000 acres for each mile of rail he laid. Such that ultimately, Henry Flagler owned over 2 million acres of Florida real estate. When the rails reached Miami, he built the Royal Palm Hotel, and then he established steamboat service to Nassau, where he bought another hotel. But Flagler's greatest ambition was yet to be fulfilled. Henry wished to take his railroad to Key West. The Panama Canal at the time was under construction, and Henry viewed Key West as America's southernmost deep-water port, which would surely benefit from the shipping to come through the Panama Canal. The project began in 1905 and was the second largest civil engineering project in the hemisphere, eclipsed only by the canal itself. Over 10,000 men worked on the Key West Railroad, and many of them lost their lives on the job. 128 miles of track were laid from Homestead on the mainland, hopscotching along all the keys to its final destination, utilizing over 18 miles of bridges. Now, the amount of fill that was used to support the tracks of the Key West Railroad. Are there engineers here? Raise your hand if you're an engineer. Okay. The amount of fill consisting of stone, what was known as marl, and cement, could fill a cube 600 feet on an edge. Try to imagine that volume. The Key West Railroad would remain in operation until 1935, when it was destroyed by a hurricane. However, Highway US 1 was later built all the way to Key West, utilizing the footings and the abutments and so forth from Flagler's Railroad. January 22nd, 1912. There was Henry in the engine cab of the first railroad, the first scheduled train to Key West, tooting the whistle as he crossed over each and every key. Now, Henry was old and tired. His greatest ambition had been accomplished. He returned to Whitehall to rest. On March 15th, 1913, in the evening, after Mary Lily and the servants had retired, Henry sought to use the gentleman's guest restroom, which lay off the great room, down 2 marble steps, guarded at the top by a spring-loaded saloon-type door. He hesitated only an instant at the top of the stairs. The door swung forward, struck him from the back, causing him to tumble down the 2 steps onto the marble floor below, fracturing his hip. He was found the next morning by the servants and placed on bed rest. Now, I'm sure you understand that bed rest was the only treatment for the broken hip at this time. When April came and the weather became hotter, he was moved over to a villa on the shore to take advantage of the sea breeze, where Henry Flagler died at age 83, 9 weeks after his fall. Now, Henry had 3 children. His first daughter died at age 4 while he was still in Cleveland. His second daughter, Jenny, gave birth to her first child early in her second marriage, a little girl to be named Marjorie. However, Marjorie would only live for hours. Whereupon Jenny's very rich father-in-law decided to take her to Florida to recover from this incident. Shortly after they set sail, however, Jenny developed postpartum sepsis and died at sea. Henry's third child, Harry, or Henry Jr., flunked out of Princeton, and he was disinherited by his father when a hotel he had been given to manage fell into bankruptcy. All of Henry's fortune would pass to Mary Lily Keenan, which was valued at the time at $150 million. Can you guess? In today's money, that would be $3 billion with a B. Mary Lily Keenan was the richest woman in America. The first thing she did was to commission her own rail car, which had a much more feminine decor than Henry's Alicia. Next, she took a car and visited some of their old haunts: Newport, the Plaza, the Greenbrier, and finally, the Grove Park Inn in Asheville. And the Grove Park had only recently opened at that time. However, it would later become a watering hole for 2 of the U.S. presidents. In Asheville, she renewed her acquaintance with Robert Bingham of Louisville, Judge Robert Bingham. She told a friend once that she had had an affair with Bingham when she was 22, and Bingham and her brother, William, were both students at UNC. Now, Bingham had significant business debts at the time, perhaps amounting to $1 million. He had lost his wife, oddly enough, about the same time that Henry died, in a collision between a train and her horse-drawn carriage, leaving Bingham with 3 teenage children. By the summer of 1916, Robert Bingham and Mary Lily decided that they would marry while they were staying together at the Greenbrier. Mary Lily announced their engagement on November 5th, and on November 15th, Robert Bingham, Mary Lily, Keenan Flagler were wed in the ballroom of the New York home of Pembroke County. You're catching on. You're good. For a wedding present, Mary Lily paid off all Bingham's debts. She gave him $50,000 in cash and the proceeds from 685,000 shares of Standard Oil stock. It's a pretty nice wedding present. Bingham, in turn, signed a prenuptial agreement renouncing forever any claim to Mary Lily's fortune. I would tend to believe that that agreement was either strongly suggested or demanded by the Keenan family. Mary Lily's maid of honor was her favorite niece, Louise Wise, her sister's daughter. Louise lost her father when she was quite young, and Mary Lily always looked after her. Remember that. Robert Bingham's best man was the distinguished surgeon Dr. Hugh Young of Johns Hopkins. Dr. Young would later become the father of modern urology. Following the wedding, just as after her first wedding, Mary Lily would not spend her wedding night under any roof, but rather on a private rail car, this time her own, on the way to Louisville. Bingham put Mary Lily up in the Seelbach Hotel in a suite. Now the Seelbach was no match for the Plaza, which she had become accustomed to. As a matter of fact, the Seelbach was what was known as a men's hotel, and it had separate entrances and separate lobbies for men and women. How would that go over today? Mary Lily would not be happy very long in Louisville. She had no friends. She could not find luxury housing. And Bingham's 3 children, Bingham's 3 children who had not attended the wedding ceremony showed her little affection. Her first Christmas in Louisville, she took her rail car back to New York City, and she purchased an array of Christmas presents for Bingham's children. Returned to Louisville, laid the presents out on the bed in her hotel room at the Seelbach, and asked Bingham's children to come in, when unbelievably, Bingham's 3 children refused to open the presents she had bought her. Mary Lily began to drink more than usual and used cocaine, which was not uncommon amongst the wealthy at this period, hence the development of Coca-Cola and cocaine. She developed headaches and chest pains, and Bingham, rather than take her to an internist, took her to his doctor, a German-born dermatologist by the name of Leo Ravitch. Dr. Ravitch would give her injections in the office, which would relieve her pain, but only for a few hours. On one office visit, Bingham's attorney shows up, and he begins to draft on the doctor's stationery a codicil to Mary Lily's will. The codicil stated that in the event of Mary Lily's death, Robert Bingham would receive $5 million in cash. The document was apparently signed by Mary Lily and witnessed by the attorney and the doctor. Now Mary Lily's health would spiral downward. She collapsed on July 10th, and she died on July 27th, 1917. Mary Lily's brother William proceeded hastily to Louisville in his rail car. Everybody had a rail car? He gathered up Mary Lily's body, took her back to Wilmington, where she was buried in the Oakdale Cemetery. Next, the Keenan family held a conclave at the Greenbrier, and 2 courses of action were decided upon. First, they hired the Burns Detective Agency of New York City to go to Louisville and investigate Mary Lily's death, as they were certain that foul play had taken place, particularly when Bingham shows them the console. And second, they enlisted the services of 2 famous pathologists from Chicago and from Baltimore to travel to Wilmington and perform a postmortem examination on Mary Lily's already interred body. The detectives botched the job in Louisville. They broke into Ravitz's office, but they stole the wrong records. Under the cover of darkness, with guards posted at the Oakdale gates, workmen dug down 6 feet to Mary Lily's tomb, which was covered with a 6-inch thick cement cap. 2 blocks of tackles were erected, but all efforts to lift this heavy cover off her tomb only resulted in broken equipment. So the workmen were sent down again into the hole, this time with sledgehammers. They broke the cover into pieces, and Mary Lily's body was removed from the tomb, placed in a gardener's cart, and wheeled to the Oakdale Lodge, where the medical experts were waiting to start the examination. Tissues were removed from her body to be taken back to their laboratories for further analysis, after which Mary Lily was reburied at Oakdale. Now, the Keenan family never released the report of this examination. However, Hugh Young, remember Hugh Young, of Baltimore, on his deathbed practically, told a friend that Mary Lily's examination had shown merely the effects of the acute and chronic use of alcohol. The Keenans paid Bingham his $5 million, which he used promptly to buy 2 Louisville newspapers, and later a string of racehorses, thus establishing the Bingham dynasty of Kentucky. Now, Mary Lily had no children of her own. Her will indicated that all of her real estate holdings, homes, hotels, etc., would pass to her very favored niece, Louise Wise. This consisted of roughly half of her $3 billion estate. Lucky Louise, wouldn't you say? The remainder of the estate, with the exception of a generous gift to the University of North Carolina, would be distributed amongst the members of the Keenan family, forever raising this family into prominence in the state of North Carolina. Mary Lily had a cousin by the name of Thomas Keenan. Thomas lived in Atlanta. Thomas received from her will $20,000, which when calculated to today would be $400,000. Thomas had a son who would graduate before long from Chapel Hill, intent on pursuing a business career. For his graduation, Thomas gave his son $10,000, which again calculated from that year would be $180,000. A fairly generous windfall, I would say, for such a young man. Thomas's son would go on to be very successful in the business world. And to complete the circle, he would go into the oil business. Can anyone tell me the name of Thomas Keenan's son?
Frank.
I'm sorry?
Frank.
Frank Keenan, absolutely. Of course it was Frank Keenan. That wasn't too hard. More of the rest of you. Now, we're going to have a 2-minute intermission, after which we will try to keep up with the Joneses and learn how Landfall came to be. Not very long. You may want to stand up, stretch your legs, say hello to your neighbor. But don't go away, because the best is yet to come. 2 minutes way to learn that the Civil War had begun. He resigned his U.S. Naval Commission, didn't want to fight for those Yankees, and became a naval officer for the Confederate States, serving on the Merrimack during its second battle with the Monitor. Pembroke's mother died when he was 3 years old. And since his father was always at sea, his maternal aunt, Alice London Dickinson, took the little boy in to her home and cared for him as her own. Captain Jones would later grant custody of Pembroke to the Dickinson family. He was raised on the northeast corner of Chestnut and Front Street and attended the Cape Fear Academy, which I didn't realize was so old. At age 19, Pembroke and his sailing partner Norwood Giles won the regatta of the Carolina Yacht Club, which incidentally was the third yacht club in America, following Newport and New York. He was made Commodore of the yacht club because of this feat, a post that he held until age 27. In 1879, at age 21, Pembroke Jones, together with Giles as his partner, founded the Carolina Rice Mills. Now, rice, as you know, was the preferred crop in the lowlands of the Carolina coast. Before long, they were processing over 100 barrels of rice a day, grinding with stone and pestle, and polishing with brushes. Within 5 years, Carolina Rice Mills had offices in Charlotte, Norfolk, Richmond, Kansas City, Cincinnati, New York, and even London. Thanksgiving Day, 1884, Pembroke Jones married Sarah Green. Sarah's father, Colonel Wharton Green, owned Tokay, which was a 469-acre vineyard of Scuppernong grapes located on the Cape Fear River, just above Fayetteville. After a royal-style wedding, Sarah and Pembroke on the train off to New York for their honeymoon. Now, before she was married, Sarah Green purchased 52 acres on Wrightsville Sound at the mouth of Bradley Creek for $5,000, upon which she would build Airlie. Within a year after she was married, she paid $11,000 for the Governor Dudley Mansion, which still stands on Front Street. At age 26, Sarah Jones owned the 2 premier properties in Wilmington. Now, Henry was a clubman. In addition to the yacht club, he belonged to the Cape Fear Club, the German Club, the Cape Fear Country Club. And in 1891, he formed the Oak Point Club, together with Henry Walters, the owner of the Seacoast Railroad Company. Walters would be involved with the Joneses his entire life. The Joneses had 3 children. Their youngest, Alice, died at age 4. Their second daughter, Sadie, was born in 1887. And in 1891, their son, Pembroke II, was born. Henry Walters became a manager of the Atlantic coastline and later served on the board of directors. Later was the chairman of the board of directors, chairman of the railroad. About this time, Walters moved in to the Dudley Mansion with the Joneses. In 1895, the mansion caught fire, after which the Joneses sold it to James Sprunk for $7,000. Now, Pembroke and Walters loved to sail, particularly in Narragansett Bay. And before long, they were members of the prestigious New York Yacht Club. About this time, Henry also bought a mansion in Newport, which he rented one, which he would later purchase and rename as Sherwood. In 1900, the Joneses purchased their first property in New York City on the west side at 13 West 51st Street. And they hired a Russian chef to join their southern cook on the staff of their mansion. The entertaining was very interesting in New York. In 1901, they would build a new entertainment area at Airlie, which could be used as a ballroom, a theater, a banquet hall, or an indoor tennis court. About this time, Mary Lilly and Henry Flagler were frequent guests of the Pembroke Joneses. They also made considerable improvements to the property, including stables, a carriage house, servants' quarters, and a golf course. Not too shabby. Indoor tennis court, private golf course. Soon the Airlie became a watering hole for the rich and famous from New York, and the Joneses attained a reputation for lavish entertaining in their homes in Newport, New York City, and Airlie, thus engendering the expression keeping up with the Joneses. Now, Walters was from Baltimore, and he was a great collector of art. The Pembroke desired to provide more sporting life for his elite guests, and he set his eyes upon the land which would become Landfall. The whole parcel was granted to the Harrison family in 1726 by King George II as what was called a king's grant. You've heard that term. Because of generational inheritance, parents to children, children to their children, the property had become divided into 18 essentially identical long, narrow strips of land extending from what is now military cutoff all the way to the water. No significant dwellings have been built on this land because it lay so far from the city of Wilmington. Jones hired Thomas Wright as his real estate agent, and it took Wright 16 years to acquire each and every one of these pieces of property, and price was no object. The total acquisition of 1,700 acres became known as Pembroke Park at Airlie. 28 miles of roads were cut through and paved not with local oyster shells, but rather with trainloads of clam shells brought by Walters Railroads from Baltimore. Pembroke selected the highest point on the water on which to build a rustic hunting cabin. But Walters convinced him that he should rival George Vanderbilt. Think what? The Biltmore Estate. And build an Italianate showplace. John Stuart Barney, a famous architect from New York, was selected. Over 100 men worked on I back up. The lodge would be built by 2 skilled carpenters together with a number of local workers as well as stonemasons. The lodge had a cost of $1.3 million in today's money. The lodge consisted of 3 great rooms attached to each other across the center. On the south was a wing with highly decorated apartments, and on the north end was a kitchen which could serve as many as 100 people. The lodge featured a 1,000-gallon water tank, coquina terraces back and front, and 4 sector-shaped fish ponds located around the Temple of Love, in which fish were stocked, which the guests could catch for dinner. The temple, as well as the lion gates at the entrance, were designed by Pembroke's son-in-law, John Russell Pope, who also designed the Jefferson Memorial. Now, many famous guests would be entertained at the lodge, including William Vanderbilt, the owner of the New York Central Railroad, politicians, and many members of the New York Society. One evening's entertainment was to be Enrico Caruso. But Caruso's accompanying pianist became ill. So Jones sent down to the Bijou Theater on Front Street in downtown Wilmington, and he engaged the theater's silent film pianist, Mildred Cornegay, to come out and play for the famed tenor. In 1901 to 1912, many distinguished guests were also entertained at Airlie, which ended up boasting 38 guest apartments and 4 heating plants. In the main house, there were 12 bedrooms, 4 on the first floor and 8 on the second. And the house was furnished with heirlooms from the Jones family, the Green family, and pieces brought back from Europe by Henry Walters. The library contained 1,500 rare and classic volumes. Entertainment at Airlie, such as the Princeton Glee Club, was ferried to the Wilmington by Walters Railroads. Now, in 1912, Jones's daughter Sadie was married at Airlie at the house, and over 500 guests attended the wedding reception. In 1913, the Joneses moved over to the east side in New York and purchased a mansion at 5 East 61st. Walters was still living with the Joneses, a very curious trio. On January 19th, 1919, Pembroke Jones died in New York following surgery. 3 years later, Sarah Jones would marry Henry Walters. in the ballroom of the New York mansion of Pembroke Jones. It was Walter's first marriage at age 74. Upon Pembroke Jones's death, the Pembroke Park and the lodge was inherited by Pembroke II. However, the Walters continued to use the lodge for entertaining until 1931, when Henry died. Sarah Jones would open the lodge only once more in 1938 for a family wedding. But soon the lodge would be emptied of its furnishings. Remember the furnishings from the Palazzo in Rome. And from 1941 to 1955, the property lay derelict. Vandals came in and broke down the stone fireplaces with sledgehammers and destroyed the fish ponds. Jane Pope, not our Jane Pope, but Pembroke's granddaughter, next inherited the 1,700-acre Pembroke Park. She married Anthony Akins, who served on PT boats with JFK in World War II, and later as ambassador to New Zealand. In the 70s, Jane and Anthony formed the Landfall Development Company. Their initial plan was for 2 18-hole golf courses with a complex building of country club, yacht club, and on the top floor, a restaurant overlooking the Intracoastal Waterway with 500 boat slips and lots to be sold, mainly to folks in the Wilmington area. Roads were laid out with such family names as Pope and London. Sound familiar? And the trees were cut down for the first 9 holes of golf. On April 1st, 1976, tragically, Anthony Akers suffered a fatal heart attack while they were staying at the Blockade Runner Hotel. Jane Akers immediately lost interest in the project, and she fled to her refuge in Palm Beach. She turned down an offer for $5,500 an acre from the Mobil Oil Company. One can only imagine what the oil company would have done with this land. Enter J.P. Go forward. Ta-da, J.P. A very successful real estate developer from Chapel Hill. Now Goforth heard that Mrs. Akers might wish to sell the property, and he pursued her with weekly trips down to Palm Beach. He even bought a condo at Boca Raton. Finally, on Memorial Day, 1984, a contract was signed for $38 million to include the 1,700 original acres. 500 additional acres, known as the Graham Farm, was purchased from Dr. Charles Graham and added to the complex, making today's plot of 2,200 acres with 3 miles of waterfront. Now, the plan of selling only lots to people in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia was obviously not going to succeed. So, marketing extended further north. Fortunately for us Yankees. And the Weyerhaeuser Company had a subsidiary known as Westminster, and they agreed to lend financial assistance to the situation. Thus, the Landfall Associates was formed. Pete Dye was hired to design the first golf course, and Drew Pearson was director of golf. The Goforths had planned for a harbor town-like complex with a saltwater inlet off the intercoastal waterway, was squelched by the Corps of Engineers. However, JP was responsible for the Spanish decor of the Landfall shopping center in an attempt to mimic Palm Beach. Plans for tennis, swimming, and dining facilities were added, and a plan for a hotel was deleted. But before long, sales were not brisk enough to support Goforth's extensive debts. He became ill, and sadly, in 1990, he took his own life in Chapel Hill. But before, in 1988, he sold all his interest to Frank Keenan, of course. Come on, folks. You ready, wait? Frank Keenan. Everything seems to end up with Frank. So where are these people now? John Rockefeller is buried not in New York, but in Cleveland, where his career began. Henry Flagler is in the churchyard of the Memorial Church of St. Augustine, which he built. He lies there beside his wife Mary, his daughter Jenny, and Jenny's baby. Mary Lily Keenan is buried in and reburied in Oakdale, where Sarah and Pembroke Jones also lie in a rather elaborate mausoleum. Robert Bingham, of course, is in Louisville. Well, I think my 45 minutes have probably long passed. However, I do have a few pictures.